Hey guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video I'm so excited about because we are officially in end of the year video territory. Compilations, favorite, least favorite book videos are always some of my favorite to film and to watch. So with that in mind, today's video I'm going to be going through my least favorite reads or my worst books of 2023. I have 11 books to chat about today. Somehow I feel like this year I had absolute knockouts, but also quite a few books I picked up and was pretty disappointed by. So I have quite a few books to chat through today, but before we dive into the books themselves, first a word from this video's sponsor, which is Curology. I'm so excited to be partnering up with Curology again for this video. I love Curology so much, and now I've been officially using them for the past few months, and honestly, so many of their products have changed the game when it comes to my skincare routine. But if you're not familiar, Curology is a leader in made-for-you prescription skincare that you're able to access online and have sent directly to your door. The convenience of this, again, is truly unmatched. Through Curology's site, you're able to access a plethora of really high-quality and affordable skincare options, from cleanser to lip balm to moisturizers, and I want to specifically sing the praises of the Rich Moisturizer by Curology, which I've been using for the past couple months during this winter season and time. This heavy-duty moisturizer is fantastic. I use it morning and night. I get very, very dry skin in the winter season. Not only is it able to provide that key moisturization, but it doesn't leave a greasy residue at all, which I find to be so hard to find, especially in a more heavy-duty moisturizer, and it's like my biggest pet peeve. This is amazing, and I have been loving using it so much. But the number one reason why I love Curology so much is the ability to work directly with a dermatology provider to gain access to skincare items with certain active ingredients, target things specifically like acne or fine lines and wrinkles. For me personally, I have been officially using a retinoid-based product nightly for the past couple months, and I have been loving it. Retinoid products are designed to target things like fine lines and wrinkles, firmness, and also dark spots, which I need help with all of those things. And I've been loving my skin after adding this into my routine. And of course, because I've already been working directly with the dermatology provider, if I need to make any changes or adjustments to my personal prescription along the way, I'm able to do that. And again, everything is sent directly to your door, so you never have to worry about running out of your favorite products. And I, of course, have a very special and exclusive offer for you guys. If you click the link down below in my bio, you're able to get 50% off your first box with Curology, which includes not only your own custom formula, but also up to 6 free skincare essentials, which is amazing. Again, big shout out to Curology for sponsoring this video. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump back into the video and chat about my least favorite books of the year. As I said, I feel like I read some amazing and not so amazing books this year. I feel like I tried to stay on trend and read some popular releases, which either absolutely delivered or really let me down. So with that in mind, a lot of the books I'm featuring today are quite popular, and some of them unfortunately just did not land for me. But let's go ahead and dive right in with probably one of the most contentious titles released in the year 2023, and that is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. This has to be one of, if not the most popular title that came out in 2023. It seemed like everyone read it and was talking about it. I got swept up in the hype, and I was personally looking forward to picking this up. For a disclaimer, I generally speaking enjoy romantasy stories, and my preferences for romantasy are basically just like, give me a fun, angsty romance, and give me a fun fantasy plotline that's not too distracting in its world building and execution. And unfortunately, on both of these fronts, I feel like Fourth Wing let me down. But what is Fourth Wing about? In this story, we're introduced to our main character Violet, and Violet is the daughter of a powerful general in this fantasy world and kingdom. At the beginning of the story, she's been training her entire life to be a scribe, and at the last minute, her mother tells her, no, you cannot become a scribe. You actually have to become a dragon rider, which is the most dangerous arm of the army in general. And we watch Violet as she basically enters this dragon riding academy, try to survive, make friends, and obviously enter a very complicated romance along the way. Conceptually speaking, this has a fun setup. I love a magic school sort of setting. I love an enemies to lover situation, and this book has both of those things. But for me, basically from the very beginning of the story, the entire book just fell flat. Not only was the pacing just completely off, but I felt like this book really relied on readers just understanding and knowing fantasy tropes, because nothing was actually really explained. It was more just referenced, but not really fleshed out in a way that actually at any point in time made this book feel like a whole existing story. I also felt like the violence was rather gratuitous, kind of nonsensical if I'm being honest from a plot building point of view. But all of that aside, even if the world building was nonsensical and didn't really make sense, I could ignore all of that and I actually found the romance in this book to be compelling. The relationship that was built between Violet and Xaden, in my opinion, was just not very compelling. I did not feel the chemistry or connection between these two main characters, and I also found the romantic pacing to be really, really off. There just really wasn't a lot of time spent with these characters actually getting to know each other to make some of their reactions feel realistic. And I also feel like there was a huge acceleration in feelings at the end of this book that just made the whole thing make even less sense, if you know what I mean. Obviously, I was very disappointed by this story. I did read it quickly. I think that's the one point in its favor that I will give. It was, for the most part, an easy read, but I was just constantly distracted by both the fantasy plot and the romance plot that I have to say I was very disappointed by this book. And I did not give it a very high rating. Next book I'm going to feature is another very popular read, and that is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. Red Rising is the first book to a very beloved sci-fi fantasy hybrid series that I have seen all over the internet. This series also had a recent release, and honestly, I was like ready to buy in. I was ready to be hooked. I was ready to fall in love. I was ready to be obsessed, but unfortunately, the first book did let me down quite a bit. This was by no means like the worst book I read this year, but I won't lie when I say I did have a few problems with this book while reading it. If you're not familiar, Red Rising is set in sort of a near future society that is heavily stratified by color and job. In this world, people are basically assigned a color and therefore the rest of their life is sort of plotted out from there. Reds in this world are treated the worst, and they're also on the bottom of this sort of pyramid of existence, where in which the most powerful people are the golds and they're at the top, and they're sort of the rulers and leaders of this society. In this story, we're introduced to our main character Darrow, and he is a red, and after a series of events that sort of turn his life upside down, he sort of presented the opportunity to get involved in rebellion and also achieve his revenge. To do this, he's basically transformed through a series of very painful experiments to basically be changed from a red to a gold. From there, we watch Darrow as he enters a sort of military school competition setting to gain a prominent and powerful position within this society, again, passing himself as a gold in this world. Positives of this book, I will say, has to be the pacing. This book was hard to put down, and it was a page turner. So much happened within this story, so much plot and action that I was constantly taken by surprise by the twists and turns of the book itself. That being said, I did struggle with two main aspects of the story. First, Darrow as our main character I found to be rather boring. As a character who's supposed to rally other individuals around him, I found him to be kind of like boring, plain bread, if you will. And maybe that's a little insulting to Darrow, but that's just how I felt. He just really wasn't a main character I could really root for. And then the other thing I'll say is the writing style of this story was kind of done in a way that was supposed to capture this grand Roman-inspired influence, but it felt very choppy and repetitive to me, and it kind of pulled me out of the story. And the last thing I will say about this book is that violence, in particular violence towards certain characters, was used as a plot device and element that I personally did not enjoy, and the female character writing in this was honestly glaringly bad. If I'm being straightforward, that is how I felt. I have heard that this series takes a huge leap going into books 2 and 3 of this trilogy, so I'm going to trust you guys and continue on. For the most part, I will say I was pretty disappointed with the first installment, Red Rising. The next book that made my list is A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon. I want to like this series so badly. Both Priory and A Day of Fallen Night I went into with like an open heart and an open mind. I want to love these books, and I will say my general disappointment with this series, I do feel like I'm kind of on an island with that, so don't let my kind of more negative review of this turn you off from this series, because a lot of people enjoy them. But if you're not familiar, A Day of Fallen Night is the prequel installment to Priory. They can be read in any order, and honestly, in a lot of ways, they're very similar stories plot-wise, just sort of introducing new characters and new character plot lines, like along with the action plot lines. Both of these books are set in a world where dragons exist. There's one very powerful fire-breathing dragon that can bring about the end of the world, and this dragon is sort of trapped below the earth and sort of prevented from doing this. In this world, there are other types of dragons too, including water dragons, plotline. And basically in these stories, you follow a slew of characters from different kingdoms and places across this fantasy landscape. And they all exist within kingdoms and cultures kind of built around the aftermath of this sort of fire-breathing dragon reality. Here's the deal with this series. I feel like the concepts of this are really strong. I also love the multi-POV experience of this. What I struggled with this book is that I feel like the plot pacing was just off. The ending and the final conclusion feels so underwhelming because it happens so quickly in a very unsatisfying way, in my opinion. And I also feel like this book struggled with having so many plot lines that many of them just felt unfinished, rushed, or ended in a very convenient fashion that I'm not even sure why they were included. In general, I just feel like this book lacked a bit of focus. I think conceptually it was strong. I do like Samantha Shannon's writing, but as an epic, it just left me wanting more, especially in the sort of fantasy plotting department. The next book that made my worst books of the year list is The Wishing Game by Meg Schaefer. I picked this book up wanting a cozy and endearing time, and unfortunately I was left very underwhelmed by the story. This is another book where I kind of feel like I'm in the minority for not enjoying it that much. So if it does sound interesting to you, I do feel like it's worth checking it out for yourself. But this is kind of a cozy, contemporary romance story. And in this story, we're introduced to our main character, Lucy. And Lucy is kind of down on her luck. She works as a teaching assistant, which she loves so much, and she hopes to become a teacher one day. Sort of prevents her from achieving this. Another thing that Lucy dreams of being able to do is adopt this young boy that's in her class who is in need of a new home after the tragic passing of his parents. But again, though, because of Lucy's economic status, she is barred from being able to go through with this adoption. However, though, everything sort of changes at the beginning of this book when she's offered an unusual opportunity to take place in a competition by her favorite childhood author. Basically, he lives on this remote, whimsical island, and he is doing a competition for some of his closest readers. They compete, and the winner gets his unpublished manuscript of his final work, which they're then able to auction off for a lot of money. Lucy participates in this challenge. She meets other people along the way. Again, I feel like this book conceptually was something I thought I was going to enjoy a lot. This book is very, very sweet, and Lucy as a main character is very rootable. And I will say the fun of traveling to this island and being surrounded by the whimsy of like a middle grade series that clearly Lucy loved so much and impacted a lot of different people was charming. But I think my issue with this book, again, really was how it included a lot of very serious topics, and I'm just not sure it gave those topics enough time and weight to really explore the enormity of them. And because it included so many, I just feel like we sort of brushed over them in a way that I'm not sure was handled in the best way possible. Again, this is just my opinion. I also feel like the beginning gave a lot of time to character building, but then I felt like the plot felt super rushed in the middle and end, so much so that like I feel like I blinked and the romance was over and the competition was over. And I feel like this book needed to be much longer, not only to explore some of these heavier topics, but also just for the sake of the plot itself. I think the concept was great and aspects of it I definitely enjoyed, but overall I would say I was wanting more when I finished this book. Speaking of a book that let me down and I wanted more from, we have My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. I was so looking forward to picking this book up because I have read some of Grady Hendrix's other horror novels and I was super entertained by them, and the concept of this just sounded so fun. It's basically like an 80s romp horror movie style book. We're following two best friends and one of them gets possessed and it's up to the other best friend to basically save them. I feel like the concept of this was strong and a lot of the 80s references within the story was fun, but I just found the execution to be really lackluster. It was like odd at times. I also felt like there was a lot of weird things that were included that I'm not quite sure why they were. Grady Hendrix tends to have some really interesting like social commentary within all of his books, kind of combining elements of true horror and then the horrors of society and culture kind of interweaving to create an all new ultra horror situation. And he definitely does that in this book, really taking on like the Reagan politics of the day. And I appreciated the attempt, but I did feel like the execution at times just kind of fell flat for me. But overall, I just expected this book to be funnier, more fun, and almost in some ways like more over the top. And it wasn't bad by any means, but I just didn't like it as much as I was anticipating. Like I was actually expecting it to be scarier, weirder, funnier. And I don't know, I was just kind of let down. Like there wasn't anything awful or wrong about this book, but it also just didn't like knock it out of the park in my opinion. Speaking of a book that didn't technically do too many things wrong, but just didn't knock it out of the park, the next book I have to chat about is The Bone Shard Emperor by Andrea Stewart. I want to like this series so badly. I read the first book, which is The Bone Shard Daughter, a few years ago, and I actually liked it for the most part. Like, it was a solid fantasy debut. Conceptually, I loved the magic system. I thought the world was interesting, and I was also compelled by quite a few characters we read from a POV point of view. It's basically set in a world where a Bone Shard Emperor rules with an iron fist, and he's able to do this because he has access to something called Bone Shard magic, which allows him to basically bring to life these different constructs that roam the land. And there's clearly some political upheaval happening and being discussed at the beginning of book 1. So with all of that in mind, I was really hoping, and I feel like I was told, that the world was really cracked open into book 2, and so much payoff was going to be present within this second installment. I was so disappointed by this story. I just feel like everything felt so convenient or expected. Nothing about the story really shocked or surprised me. And honestly, if I'm being straightforward, I was just kind of bored reading this book. I wanted to love it. I still stand by my perspectives on book 1. I thought it was a strong start to a series, and I really enjoy the magic system in this world. I was just honestly so underwhelmed by book 2. It kind of breaks my heart, and I wish I liked this a lot more than I did. The next book honestly might be a bit of a shock, and it's still kind of shocking to me that I'm putting this book in this video, but I feel like I have to, just based off of my response to reading this book. And that is Wrath by John Gwynne. That's right, I have the 4th and final book to the Faithful and the Fallen series on my worst books of 2023. I am still kind of confused by what happened at the end of the series, not because it was confusing, but just how much my feelings changed toward this series by the time I finished it. I marathoned this entire series. It was a blast to do so. I loved books 1 through 3 so much. Those books are probably some of my favorite books I've read this year, and I was just so unbelievably underwhelmed by this 4th and final installment. This is a perfect example of nothing that was necessarily bad, but I just found this 4th installment to be so fan servicey and really, really repetitive in the plot. But if you're not familiar, the Faithful and the Fallen series is like an epic multi-POV fantasy work. It's very, very classic fantasy of chosen one versus evildoer. You're basically seeing two sides in an ancient war gather their forces and go head to head within this sort of medieval landscape. You read and follow a huge multitude of characters and see how they crisscross book over book over book. And I think my main problem with book 4 is that in this series, you fall in love with so many characters. There are so many great character arcs and experiences that you have, but I do feel like the author maybe got too focused on giving these characters the best send-off ever that would be most memorable and most lovable by the audience of these characters, that they kind of, in my opinion, almost became like caricatures of themselves, and they sort of lost all of the things and the reasons why I fell in love with them in the first place. And I just felt so disconnected to the narrative of this book, and so many of the POVs in this 4th and final installment, I was shocked, and I was just waiting for it to end, which I just cannot believe I'm even saying. This whole book just felt a little too cheesy to me. And there's always a little bit of cheese in The Faithful and the Fallen, but I found it to be endearing cheese. But in this 4th book, it just didn't work out for me in that way. The plot did wrap up in a satisfying fashion, but the journey just wasn't as fun as I was expecting within this final installment. Tragically. I'm heartbroken about this one. Next book that is on my list is The Only One Left by Riley Sager. Another book I feel like that just blew it in the last 20 minutes of reading this story. I had never read a Riley Sager before picking this book up, and I feel like I probably won't read another one because I do feel like he has a style, which is totally fair to say. If Riley Sager's style is for you, you're probably gonna love this book, but if it's not, you're probably not gonna enjoy this book. You know what I mean? Conceptually speaking, going into this, I was excited because I love gothic horror stories, and that is what this book is. In it, we're basically following our main character who works as a caretaker, and at the beginning of this book, she takes on an unexpected job to care for an older woman in this remote house in Maine. But this is no ordinary woman and no ordinary house because it's at the center of one of the most notorious murders in this small town. Basically, everyone thinks this woman killed her parents and her sister many, many years ago. And when our main character begins working at this house, this woman tells her, "Do you want to know the truth?" and begins to tell what happened that fateful night many decades prior. This book utilizes a dual timeline, which I think was actually rather successful. We are in present day dealing with our main character as she's getting settled into this house and this new job. The house is weird. The people that work there are weird. There's clearly something that's off. But we also jump to the past as we begin to uncover what happened on that day of the murders. And the sort of intertwining of timelines did create great pacing, and I found it to be enjoyable. This book is a weird one because I loved like 95% of it. I was entertained, I was interested, I liked the setting, I liked the writing. To me, it was a successful gothic horror story. But then the last 20 pages happened, and I swear Riley Sager was like, "I don't want one twist. I don't want two twists. I want 30 twists all at once." So many things were happening. I felt like he was just pulling characters out of closets. I was like, this doesn't make sense to me at all. And I felt like there was just so many reveals. It sort of cheapened the reveals because there was just so many. I can't emphasize enough like how many reveals there were. And by the end, I literally was just like kind of laughing out loud because it felt so absurd and not like satisfying, you know? And I will say the trail of clues, many of these reveals, I also felt like weren't there. I feel like if it was like a true Agatha Christie and this is how everything sort of happened, I would have been fine with it. But some of it just felt so random and not called to that I was like, I don't know what to do with this information. And that's how I felt about this book. It was just a lot at the end. But if you like a lot of reveals, if you love like really unexpected twists, Riley Sager is going to deliver that. And if you like that type of thriller setup, you probably would like this. And again, I really enjoyed most of this book, but just his style of reveals is just not for me personally. Next book that's on my list is another popular release, and that is One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. This is another book I am going to continue on with because while I didn't love the first installment, I did like it, but I would say because I was expecting to love it with everyone else, just liking it made me a bit disappointed with it by the end. But there were some elements of it I do feel like were strong and compelling enough for me to continue on with the series. One Dark Window follows our main character Elsbeth, and she, since she was a young child, has basically had this like voice and monster living in her brain, and it also protects her from a lot of things surrounding her in her life. Elsbeth also lives in a kingdom that is tormented by this evil mist that encroaches on the kingdom more and more every single year. In this kingdom, there's also a magic system centering around like a deck of cards. These physical cards allow the holder to manifest into different powers depending on the card itself. The magic system of this world is honestly really creative and by far my favorite part of the story, and our main character's past and her family was honestly really interesting to read, and I liked her rooting the story overall. What I felt disappointed by was, I would say, the main reason why I picked this book up, and that was the romance. The book sort of sells that our main character is wrapped up in this unexpected conspiracy, and there's this sort of hate to love situation at the root of it, and I was like, yes, I love bandits and revolution and romance, like tell me more. And so many people had said such great things about the romance in this story that I was like ready and willing to be hooked. Unfortunately, I just found the romance to just lack chemistry for me. I just didn't connect or buy into their connection. It was a real bummer because I actually really enjoyed a lot of other aspects of this book and story. With that in mind though, I am going to continue on with the next installment because people say it's even better than the first one, and maybe I need more time, or even better, maybe there's a love triangle that will re-spice the romance up for me personally. But this is one I would recommend even though I didn't love it because it was kind of just like a personal response of not really buying into or loving the character's chemistry. And I feel like that is really going to differ person to person. The other elements of this book I did find to be rather compelling. And the next book that's on my disappointing list is The Viscount Who Loved Me by Julia Quinn. I watched season 2 of Bridgerton this year and loved it so much. The drama, the hate to love, the pacing of the romance was just top tier. That season skyrocketed to one of my favorite pieces of like historical romance media. So naturally, I finished that season and immediately wanted to pick up the book because I just needed more of these characters I had fallen in love with so much within the TV show. And unfortunately, The Viscount Who Loved Me by Julia Quinn, the book version, was just really lackluster in comparison. If you're not familiar, the setup of this book is basically an enemy enemies to lovers situation. There's basically a woman and a younger sister who are entering society, and the younger sister is like beautiful and talented and charismatic, where the older sister feels like she is not. And the younger sister gets a match with this Viscount who's marrying for like pure convenience reasons because he doesn't want to fall in love because of the trauma he has in his life. And then the older sister and this Viscount kind of begin to have this sort of back and forth romance situation. The show is so good, and the drama that exists between these two characters is impeccable. The book versions of these characters are just not likable at all. The main female character is whiny in a way that I did not enjoy, and the back and forth between them just did not exist. It was fine, but it really paled in comparison to the show adaptation, which I feel like I never say, and honestly, I just found it to be very underwhelming. And the last book that's on my worst books of 2023, I cannot believe I'm even saying, and that is the Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England by Brandon Sanderson. Yes, I have a Brandon Sanderson book on my worst books of 2023. I did not see that one coming, especially because this is one of my favorite authors of all time, and most of the time his books grace my favorite books of the year. In this story, we're introduced to our main character who basically wakes up in a field surrounded by fire. He has no idea who he is or where he is, but he does find a crumbled up handbook in his pocket, which seems like he paid for some type of service, which transported him to an alternate world in an alternate historical setting of like medieval England. So here he is in medieval England trying to figure out what in the world is going on, and something is going on. There seems to be other people that are transported here too, that he is like searching and seeking out for some reasons. He makes allies along the way and tries to help the people living here, and like a larger conspiracy is at play. Here's the deal about this book. I think the concept is really fun, this sort of alternative medieval England setting, our main character coming from sort of unknown future and not really knowing who he is or why he's there, and being pulled into like this larger mystery existing within this place, I found was cool. The parts of this book I did not enjoy, unfortunately, was just our main character. You're in his head, and I feel like so often with first person point of views, if you're not digging the narration, if you're not digging the humor, their perspective, if you're not rooting for them as your main character, it's just gonna kind of fall flat, and that's personally what happened to me. I just didn't like him that much. I didn't find him funny. I didn't like his jokes. I didn't like his past and motivations. He just didn't really resonate with me as a main character, and so while I loved the concept, the execution just really wasn't it for me. I know I'm not alone in this, which does make me feel a bit better. But yeah, I have to say, Brandon Sanderson didn't do it for me with this one, which is crazy. Alrighty guys, those are my worst reads of 2023. Please let me know down below some books you were disappointed by that you picked up this year, as I would love to know. Again, big shout out to Curology for sponsoring this video. I will have my special offer linked down below as well. But thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you soon with another one soon. Goodbye!